an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Well, that was a short summer. Welcome in. Here we go. It's the 17th day of April, Monday, kicking off the week for the back half of this month. Wow, where'd that go? In this part of the world, back into something that resembles normal weather for this time of year. Just a glorious weekend here in Toronto. Temperatures up in the mid to high 20s. Had the opportunity to complain about the heat and humidity. It was great. Just getting us all set for what we hope is a lovely spring and a good summer here. Of course, this entire city is on edge because the puck drops tomorrow on the first game of the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Leafs taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning. And you don't even have to be a hockey fan to kind of have that beaten puppy syndrome going on. You know, the dog just saw you walk in the room with the newspaper and cowers in the corner. Yeah, we're all kind of reflexively like that as a city right now as we watch the Leafs. And you know what? I don't know. I watched the Leafs for a long time. I'm not sure I've seen a better Leaf team ever. So if they don't win now, ugh. Anyway, we'll all watch with giddy anticipation, shall we? As we make our way through this first round of the playoffs. What worries me most is all the sport know-it-alls are picking the Leafs to win. That can't be right. That just can't be good. So, you know, you got to be an optimist. So I think maybe this week is all about optimism. So I have two of the guys that are going to be on the show this week, probably the most optimistic human beings on the planet. So we're going to kick off the week by introducing you to a familiar voice, friend of the show. Neil Hetherington is the CEO at Daily Bread. You a Leaf fan? You a hockey fan?
I am a Leaf fan. When I lived in New York City, however, I did fall into the trap of starting to love the Rangers. And, you know, there is something about seeing a game at Madison Square Garden. Nobody is leaving their seat for half of the period to get their sushi. They are there. They are into the game. They were yelling. They're screaming. And there's a vibe there that I don't think that we always have in Toronto that I would love to see more of.
Yeah, my son and I were at a game recently, and I hadn't been in a while, and I was shocked at how deadly dull the whole thing was, with the exception of what was going on the rink, to the point where we were sitting right behind the Leaf goal in the first period, and when the play was in the other end, you could hear skates carving the ice. I mean, there was no noise at all in the arena, and I thought, my gosh, you know. There's no excitement, period.
No, and you can't get too wild and crazy when you're paying the amount of money that you're paying to get there, and when you've got an important client sitting beside you, and so anyway, but don't get me wrong. I'm hopeful for the Leafs. Your commentary in terms of hockey know-it-alls, which I am not. We're picking the Leafs. That's nice to hear. I also heard Edmonton this morning, and so we'll see. It's I don't know. It's a fun time of year on that front. And since I have the mic, I'll also say it's a fun time of year for Riley Hetherington, number 5 of the GTHL North Toronto team, who is in the championship. He's down by 4, and he needs to pull up his hockey socks and get a win tomorrow night.
There you go. Always good hockey at the North Toronto club there. They've been, you know, creating great recreation, good hockey players for a long time. And just a small bit of trivia, and I'm sure you've spent some time in the North Toronto Arena, the Memorial Arena there.
Lots.
Yeah, so there's a plaque on the wall there. I don't know if you've noticed it, but it actually commemorates Christy Blatchford's dad. Now, Christy Blatchford, of course, the legendary journalist who, you know, passed away a few years ago. Her dad was the guy who managed that arena for years. So they put up a
Interesting.
plaque on, yeah, and they've noted that, that's his name is on the wall at North Toronto Arena. So
My history with Christy Blatchford was I was 13 years old, and I said something to a politician who came to, it was Michael Wilson, the finance minister, and he came to my school, St. George's, and I called him out. I don't know how, but I called him out on the GST. They were bringing in the GST at the time. And I don't know what I said, but apparently it was polite, but it was rather pointed. And Christy Blatchford quoted me in the Toronto Sun at the age of 13 or 14, and that was the very first time that had happened in my life. And anyway, that was a random fact for you.
I always loved talking about when we'd be in the field on whatever story, and we crossed paths so many times. And she was a regular commentator at News Talk 1010 when I was there, so CFRB. But she always found a way to really personalize the storytelling, and you knew that it was happening. Didn't matter what story we were covering. There'd be a typical scrum, all of us standing in there with microphones and notepads and so on, taking our notes. And then all of a sudden, Christy would just disappear. She wouldn't be hanging with the kids anymore. And then the next day she'd come back with this awesome story because she had gone off and taken something that somebody had said in the scrum, and she'd, worked her sources and found the real live human being story in the whole thing. And she was just so, and by the, as years went on, I knew, okay, 3, 2, 1, Christy's gone. So you knew that she was off on some grand plan to tell great stories. So, yeah, and we miss her a lot in terms of the story. She would have been all over this Leaf thing. Can you imagine the Leaf stories that she would tell? All good. And later in the week, Tony Chapman's going to be on with us. He's all about the optimism. That's the whole theme. Purpose behind Chatter That Matters, kind of get away from the negative news and the doom and gloom. I was talking to Lindsay Broadhead last week, and she in fact wanted to kind of get to like solutions and get to more of the the optimistic side of the stories that we need to be focusing on and some of the bigger vision. And because it's easy to kind of get down in that well. So last week, I spent some time kind of going over what you guys were talking about at your news conference, releasing your latest numbers from the reports.
A single individual on Ontario Works receives a dismal $733 a month to survive on, the exact same amount as in 2018. A single individual on disability is receiving $1,229 per month to survive on, some $900 below the poverty line.
So what's the good news in all of that? Because you guys stood up in front of the media and they did their note taking and did their recordings and everything else. But the message that was sort of conveyed was, this is very bad, very bad, very bad. But I didn't hear, and it's a week later now, I didn't hear anybody stand up and say, what's the minister going to do about it? Where is the government on this? Because you've called them out and demanded, insisted, asked for, begged, pleaded, whatever posture that you want to take to actually get at least the income supports for those who are on social services, on pensions and welfare, to at least be reinstated to where we were during COVID, because we saw that it had a positive effect. It worries me, Neil, that what came out of your mouth was important. What came out of your mouth was dire. It was an important message. Yeah, I think you made it well, but I didn't get any sense that there was a follow-up vis-a-vis accountability. Now, have I missed anything in the last week?
You haven't. And so you said this is going to be a week of optimism. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to provide that optimism. We did have a response from the ministry, and it was, listen, we've done a lot. We moved disability up 5%, so that was some $50 per month that was increased. That is after years of not increasing it. And again, as you played that clip,
somebody on disability is $900 below the poverty line. We legislate that people be in poverty if they cannot work. And so we had that response, and I was disappointed with it. We are in far bigger an emergency now than we were during COVID. And so you'd expect that the government would respond in a crisis-like situation. We know that they can, and we know that their money is available there for them to do it. In the third quarter, the underspend of social services, which this would fall under, was $463 million. That was the underspend by the Auditor General when they reviewed this. And so we know the money is budgeted for, and we know the need is there. We just have to get the two together. So I did speak with a couple of other members of government following the press conference. And they said, well, it's a no for now, but don't, you need to keep on going. And I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep raising our voices on that front. But you know what? You can't end without a little hope and optimism. So here's the hope and optimism, Dave. There's a bill that got unanimous consent in the House of Commons. It's called Bill C-22. We don't hear a lot about it. And what it would be is a disability top-up to provincial disability payments, so at a federal level. So the framework has been put in place. It should get royal assent in the weeks to come. And once that happens, then the government will have to set aside, okay, well, what's the funding that we would like to attach to this, and hopefully that starts to fill a void that is there. But in many ways, that also lets provinces off the hook. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. But I have optimism in that one.
Yeah, well, I guess, as I was going through all of that and looking at the responses from both levels of government, and I suppose, you have to take the city to task to some degree in terms of their inability to support this, but they're in such a hole here in Toronto, just, looking at $1.5 odd billion that they needed in immediate funding from the other two levels of government, primarily covering off the services that should be covered by the provincial and federal governments, like housing and social services and health services. I mean, there's close to $1 billion there, if not more. So
well, I have great empathy for cities. Toronto, I'm closest to Toronto, but across the province, when the federal government provides, as it should, opportunities for individuals to come to Canada, particularly during crises, but doesn't attach funding dollars for social services that often get downloaded to the shelters in cities, to social programs with the province, it makes it very, very difficult so yes, it's the right thing to do on a global stage, but there needs to be real dollars attached to it.
Well, you have to you talk about the shelters, the increased demand for shelter beds is up like 50% pre-pandemic to now. And when you look at the number of beds designated for refugees, it's more than 5 times the demand pre-pandemic to now on a nightly basis. And all of that stuff falls in the lap of the federal government. And, look around. There are a lot of liberals who are sitting on the government benches from Toronto. So I don't understand the tone deafness around all of this.
Neither do I. And if you look at actual shelter costs, so shelter, now this is probably 4 years out of date, but generally the city was spending about $130 to $140 per night per shelter guest. And you add that up and you go, okay, well, there's $4,500 a month. I think I got my math wrong there, but it's certainly far more
than it would cost to be able to rent a decent place to live. It's far less expensive to build affordable housing than it is to provide shelter beds. And you know, we got to get to the place where we look at the costs of poverty and say it is in our best economic interest to tackle it systemically rather than the band-aid approach after the fact.
But what I took away from your sort of summation of the new and latest statistics, by the way, 270,000 visits, was that in February or March?
That was in March, and by comparison, March 2020, it was 72,000.
Yeah. So when we look at that number, and you were actually waving this flag, I think, in the first few months of COVID, based on the experience from the recession back in 08, 09, that the lagging indicator is going to be years in terms of effect. That is to say, we haven't seen the peak yet in terms of the demand for food banks, the pressures on social services. Is there a peak in sight based on the projections you're looking at?
So, no, and I've been looking at our numbers and just saying, is there any sort of flattening of the curve? Is there anything optimistically, even on a weekly basis, that would give us an opportunity to be positive? The answer is no on that front. And, we were waving that flag, Dave, around 2000, saying, guys, it's going to get far worse years from now. So let's take it seriously when we say let's build back better. Let's actually do that. We recognized that there was no resiliency in the system, that people did not have the capacity to deal with the lack of a paycheck for a week or 2 weeks, let alone months. And therefore, we know we need something fundamentally different. Let's build back better. But we never did. And we see that now.
Well, and I think the worry is that there's this sort of baked in attitude that it's a number of things contribute to it. First is there's a fatigue around, oh my God, I don't want to have to deal and cope with and listen to any more about COVID. That's part of it. But there's also a sense that, oh, look, housing numbers are starting to, the cost of the value of my home, my real estate's going back up. That's bouncing back. We've got lower unemployment than we had expected. So all of these things contribute to, this sense, I think, that we're recovering. We're back in a good place. But I think you pointed out last week, look at everything that's going on, but still we've got inflation where inflation is at. We've still got these record numbers in terms of people who would need the food banks. 33% of the folks who are lining up at food banks have full-time jobs. If all of a sudden, unemployment bumped up by a percentage point, what would that mean to the number of people visiting you?
Yeah. I mean, it is upside down. The fact that we have the record low unemployment and record high food bank usage speaks to a broader issue that we need to tackle. Why is it that 50% of food bank users have a post-secondary education, went out, got a job, and still have to make use of food charity? 1 in 5 Canadians in April of 2022 said that they believe this year they would have to turn to food charity. 1 in 5 Canadians. That doesn't make any sense, and speaks to not just the issues that we were speaking about in terms of disability payment and those on fixed incomes, but to a broader systemic issue of where incomes are at versus costs in the country.
Nobody saw it coming, and that was part of the problem with the pandemic. But we're all sort of structured around institutions that were, developed actually, and grew pre-pandemic. But the food bank is, sort of in this city anyway, back in the 80s is when it kind of started out. We all still have that image of that's what the food bank was in 1985. That's what it is in 2023. I'm not sure, based on the way things are going, and then just I'm no expert, but I'm just kind of standing back as the paid observer and suggesting that the food bank model is not sustainable based on the way this is going.
You're right. And that's why we made the call out. We said, enough is enough. There is always going to be a need in our society for temporary relief, for emergency relief for individuals going through crisis. There will always be a need, and there always has been throughout history. Whether it's a soup kitchen in the 30s, there has always been an empathetic, charitable model to be able to help somebody during a really difficult time. Um, but you look at it now and you start to have honest conversations about whether or not we're creating parallel social systems. And and it is getting to a point, 270,000 client visits in a single month, where we're spending not $1.5 million a year, but $1.8 million per month, where you just say, I don't know how far we can continue to go. We've had this history where need goes up, we meet that need. Need goes up, we'll meet the need again. We changed our systems. I can't tell you how proud I am of the Daily Bread team, our operations in particular, and our fundraising, where we have been able to continuously meet the need. But it is out of control right now, and that is getting us agitated. And as a result, we did the media conference, and I expect you'll see us push much harder and be a little less polite in the days to come.
Well, and I've said this to others and who kind of follow that same path. And how long can you afford to be patient? I mean, we're well past that now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we are thinking about different ways that we can make the message known. Last week was helpful in that more people were talking about food insecurity and the crisis that we're in. But it can't be a blip in a media cycle. It's going to require all levels of government to respond, and so we will a little less politely knock on the door and say we need action on this front.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm worried about, and I think I made the point last week, we're almost at a point of normalizing poverty, to the point where, well, it's just one of those things we're going to have to learn to live with. And just so long as it's not me, it's okay.
And I mean, isn't that, I mean, it's tragic. You know, I mentioned earlier my nephew, Riley. I wonder whether or not he and his brothers, as they walk the streets and they see an increasing number of individuals who are experiencing homelessness and just say, well, isn't that just the way it is? And it's always been that way to them. Not when I was growing up. When I was growing up, when it was, Toronto the good, we didn't see what we see now. We didn't see encampments. Now, was that pushed off? Was it hidden? Um, I don't know all the answers at all to that, but I would say it was the exception and not the rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when you start to think of the stark numbers, there's something like $600 million plus that's spent on housing services and shelters in this city on an annual basis. 317 million of that is a hole in the budget as of January. Something has to happen within the next couple of months to fix that. Otherwise, you're talking about half of that housing budget just disappearing for shelters.
Well, and I think that you need to look to recent bills that have been passed that with the guys to build affordable housing, which took away uh, development charges that were helpful to cities to be able to support housing programs. And I think the consequences of that are not yet felt. And I think we'll probably have a conversation in a year about that and how housing departments across the province are able to manage.
Mm-hmm. Short term, aside from just me flapping my gums and talking about it, what should we be doing?
So first of all, I'm grateful for everybody still listening to this very difficult rant that I have been on, and we have been on, and many in the sector have been on about the concerns. And if you're as concerned, I would just ask that people go to dailybread.ca/take action. So there's just a really easy thing that you can do that lets government know that you care about this. It doesn't cost anything to do it. We won't bug you after, but it sends a letter to elected officials in your postal code that says, "Come on, you've got a poverty reduction strategy. Please, for God's sake, care, implement it."
Yeah, I just astounds me that the folks, again, who are sitting in those chairs that can make a difference seem indifferent. And that might be harsh, but I don't quite get. And this falls as much on the opposition parties as it does government, because, where are they in terms of banging the desks for this? I'm astounded and dumbfounded by it. It doesn't take much to make me sound stupid, but this this is where I am, and I begin to think, this is not about politics, or it shouldn't be.
I'm right beside you. It is all levels of government, and for those who didn't hear your podcast, I think it was a week ago Friday. We could put a link in where you rant about this in such a poetic way, and it was great, Dave. We do need to take action. We need each elected official, again, regardless of political stripe, regardless of level of government, something's got to be done.
Neil Hetherington, it's always good to talk to you, and whether it's about your levels of optimism or your warnings of what is to come, you're prophetic from that perspective, because I think you actually nailed it. Like I said, a couple months into the pandemic, saying we're on this trajectory and we don't see an end to it. But the good news is there are people who can stand up and do something about it, and then maybe this is what it's going to take to kind of bring it to a boil. I just begin to wonder, at what point does this become an actionable crisis? When is it a state of emergency? The COVID-19 was a state of emergency. And as you point out, we're in a worse situation now than we were 2.5 years ago. So is this worthy of a state of emergency?
Yeah. If you care about the costs of the lack of action costs us a tremendous amount every single year, and you feel it in the streets, you see it in the streets, whether it's increases in crime, petty theft, having you see it all around, and we can return to some more hopeful days.
Well, we'll count on you to lead the way. Good to talk to you. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks so much, Dave.
Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.